All right, guys, hip joint. We're going to get into the hard stuff. I say hard, but the harder stuff first, because I think the easy stuff is easy. Into fetal, out of fetal, hip flexion, hip extension. We're going to get into the ab and adduction and the internal and external rotation. I'm going to explain why it can be tricky and hopefully put you in a position to understand it where you're not tricky. It's all good. And then we'll get into those pesky illusions, okay? So the first thing about ab and adduction, it's traditionally frontal plane movements of the shoulder. So sagittal zone by the flexion and the extension, getting you in the fetal and out of fetal. But the first issue with ab and adduction is the two motions dang near sound the same. And I wish it wasn't like that. Like, I wish it was just like Fred and Vilma. But abduction, adduction, bleh. We had, I think I told you guys a story. If not, here it is again. We had twins that I graduated with. They were fraternal twins, didn't look alike, two separate eggs. They looked nothing alike, but their names were Heath and Keith. And so growing up, until you kind of really learned it, you know, our teachers or people would always flip their names, not because they looked the same, because their names sounded so close together. So that's one of our challenges with ab and adduction. So you're going to hear me try to compensate by saying ab, or ad, and it's going to sound silly, and it's meant to be silly. Or I might do a B-duction and a D-duction with emphases on syllables, because again, abduction, adduction, bleh. Now, in trying to keep a theme of purpose, flexion gets you in the fetal, extension gets you out of fetal. Ab and adduction serve a similar purpose if you look at it in a certain way. I'm going to start off with the shoulder because the shoulder has more motion than the hip, so you can see the outcome at the shoulder joint that you can't really get at the hip because you don't have as much motion. Some people will refer to ab and adduction, and when I say some people, clinicians and in the literature as well, as lateral flexion. Okay? But when you think about, well, lateral flexion, now how am I getting into a ball? It's not necessarily the journey, it's the end result. So what I mean by that is, if Ken does shoulder flexion where his shoulders are the most into fetal, and if Ken, let's pretend this is Kim's right shoulder right here, if Ken abducts his shoulder as much as he can, wouldn't he get in a similar place? Does that make sense? You get to a similar place. Now, you have to do a little something extra, a little lanyard to get there, but you get to a similar place. And so ab and adduction still has a kind of purpose. It's to try to get you, if we're going to use an up and down term, it's still trying to get you to a certain place. You're just not taking the same road. You're taking a different route to get there. Here you're taking the sagittal road. Here you're taking the frontal and transverse road, because as I'm going to teach you at the shoulder, you got to rotate the shoulder in order to get up there, okay? So abduction. I know what your instinct wants me to say. Well, that's rotation away from the midline, and I'm not going to say it. Because sometimes you can have abduction towards the midline. I mean, it's You know, when you're in anatomical, yeah, you may happen to go away linearly, but remember, joint motions have nothing to do with linear concepts. It's rotational concepts. And again, I'm showing you shoulder because the hip doesn't have as much motion. But if you say abduction is just frontal plane movement away from the midline, I'm gonna get you when I go away, 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 whoa, back, 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 back. And your instinct is gonna say, well, I went away, that's ab. I came back, that's ad. So this must be ab. And I'm like, that's like saying what you just, and I say you, it's not personal. It's just someone who might say that is like saying this. Clockwise, 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 clockwise. Oh, coming back, counterclockwise, 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 counterclockwise. You see what I just did there? Well, wait, clockwise went away from the midline. Whoa, I'm coming back, that must be counterclockwise. Nah, Cap, it's the same rotation the whole time. Because the ab and adduction has zero to do with away or toward a midline and everything to do with, are you trying to get to that finish line just in a different plane? Ab, So what I like to do is use clock references because something we're familiar with. And we can also understand rotation. So like this would be my arm. Specifically, this would be my right arm. Well, Campbell, what about the left? Mirror effect when we're talking about appendicular motion. I could go into a mirror and do this. That arm in the mirror isn't going to go with it. If it did, you're in a horror movie, and you probably want, it's always at nighttime, and you always want to get out of the house. Check this out. Right shoulder, ab, AB, is going to be as if it's clockwise rotation from the right shoulder. So if we're having a mirror effect, the other shoulder is going to go counterclockwise, right? Because it's a mirror. In fact, if I looked at the clock in the mirror, these numbers are going to be flipped. So actually, this is what's really awesome. I'm such a geek. I'm sorry. I hope you just embrace it and just roll with my geekdom. If I did this clock in the mirror, and this one went clockwise and the other one counterclockwise, it didn't matter. That one went to 9 o'clock. They rotated the same. Does that make sense? So from a global standpoint, it looks like it's spinning differently, but it's actually not. It's spinning the exact same. The double doors are both opening, even though the rotations look different. That's what we're getting at. From 6 to 9, like this in the mirror, is literally going to be from 6 to 9 this way. Abduction. It's not about going further away from a point. It's about rotating further away to try to get the clock hand to another number. And adduction is like reversing time, going back in time, hitting the rewind button, going back. Ab and add. Yes, ma'am.
6 to 9, you're saying is add. Going back from -6 is add, but not 6 to 3.
That's still add.
Add.
Wait. 6 to 3. Let me make sure we're on the same clock. All right. So one of the reasons that I always use the right is for the mirror effect, right? So I'm using the right, but understand that if I do both arms and I do this on this one, the other one's going to do that. Okay? So where are we going? 6 to 3. So what would have to happen there is my body, I could do it. The problem is I have this kind of torso that gets in the way. So what I have to do is kind of step aside and then kind of let it.
I think I was assuming the other side.
Yeah, no problem. Well, we can do the other side, but I just have to make you understand that this is 6, this is 7, this is 8, and this is 9. Does that make sense? So 6 to 3 is how you would want to see it globally, because it is what it is. But I need you to like rewire it to see 6 to 9 here is a mirror of 6 to 9 there. Because like I said, if my clock in that mirror does this, there's a demon in that mirror. And again, it's to show that this is the same thing. I'm going away from 6 o'clock. I'm going towards 6 o'clock. And functionally, I'm in a different plane or a different road. I'm ultimately trying to get to fetal once I get up here. So it's like traveling to get up and to eventually fetal. Because I mean, you could do that. Like, oh my God, heads up. You don't have to be like this. I mean, you could, you could take that road to get there. Make sense? All right, so let's look at the hips. Concepts. Right or left hip? Left. Left hip, ab, left hip, ad, right hip, ab, right hip, ad, left hip, nothing. That's going to get you. Thank you, I wrote that joke myself. It's going to get you, because, and I do my best to tell you why it's going to get you, because you may have been introduced to this stuff by leg goes out, leg goes away from midline. Ladies and gentlemen, young professionals, the leg is not a joint. Hip is a joint made up an articulation of two separate rigid links. But this is left hip abduction. This is left hip, not a darn thing.
Well, what's happening at the right hip when you do that?
We're gonna get to those illusions.
Okay.
Absolutely. Okay? So left hip ab, right hip ab. For those of you that would like to participate, you don't have to. I understand some of you are shy, but sometimes it just takes one or two people to break the ice. Would you please, if you're willing and able, stand, and we're going to do a quick experiment. Yay! Also, feel free to record if what I show you is useful. Feel free to record it after we do the situation. Guys, coming later and later and later and later really throws me off. So, what I want you to notice is both of our hips, we can have bilateral hip flexion with zero problem. Okay? And notice, if all you did was kind of crunch your trunk, you don't get very far down. The hips is really what gets you down to tie your shoes. Okay. Now, here's the fun part. Bilateral hip flexion, no problem. Bilateral hip extension, no problem. With both feet on the ground, try to have bilateral hip abduction. Try to do this while your feet are on the ground. Do you notice a problem? Yeah, there you go. You can get off the ground and do it, right? Because when you jump off the ground, now it's like arms, right? Your arms aren't fixed to anything. You can't. Now what I'd like for you to do is try to, with your feet on the ground, Peter Pan, that was a really cool move. Try to externally rotate, or try to rotate your hips the same, okay? Try to make both of them spin laterally, or both of them spin medially. Your foot shouldn't go anywhere. True? So the point is, last example, feet on the ground. Now do something like this, like shift your hips. Nothing but expensive props in this class, ladies and gentlemen. Now this stuff is happening. And this stuff is happening. Opposite hip motion can happen. Does that make sense? So that's one of the hardest things that we're going to do in this class. You know why? Because the pelvis is hidden by our clothes and our stuff. It's kind of easy to see this. It's hard to see what's happening up in here. For my softball girls, you know, when I was playing baseball, you know, we'd throw sometimes, and I worked college softball for 2 years. You can't hide the ball out here. But when I tried to hit off our pitchers, good luck. Because it was like that ball just, it was like some Harry Potter stuff, man. It was just popping out of nowhere, but it's because it's hard to see the stuff that's happening here. Y'all can be seated, thank you. It's hard, but that doesn't mean it's not impossible. And not only that, embrace the difficulty, because it's going to make you a better professional. It's going to make you level up to other people who haven't had a degree in kinesiology and who are certified through Kellogg's Corn Flakes. It's going to level you up. So this is what I'm getting at. The easy stuff, the stuff you've probably been introduced to. It looks like it's moving, and it is. Left hip flexion, left hip extension, flexion from, extension to, extension from, flexion to, abduction from, adduction to, rotation from, rotation to. I'm going to get to those. But this is the hard part. When we do stuff like this, and I'm accentuating it, but sometimes it's subtle. You've been standing for a while, so you're going to shift your weight. That's subtle. But what's happening is that your hips are doing opposite things to make the penguin in the pelvis tilt. And my job is to show you how those opposite things happen. The abs versus the abs. Okay? So like something, sorry, Mr. Knox. So if I do something like this, I need you to see how my right hip abducted and my left hip adducted. And that's sometimes very hard to see because we typically don't move, looks like it's moving, and it is, I mean, I guess unless you're a soldier or you clap at your feet, but we don't typically go past 6 o'clock in the other direction of spin. But we do it all the time when we move the socket about the ball. So what I'm going to show you several times, I'm going to use clues. There's clues in the clothing. I'm going to use like my hands to represent like my hips are in anatomical position. And then I'm going to say, okay guys, how did the hips move when I did this? And this represents kind of where my hips were relative to my pelvis. You say, oh, well, this one's laterally flexed or abducted. And this one is laterally extended. You guys, laterally extended, that just means I'm further away from fetal position. That's all it means. Or adducted. And then eventually we're going to talk about how the penguin spins, how the pelvis spins. But that's for another lecture. So I need you guys to be able to see things like left hip adduction, right hip abduction. My left hip is adducted, my right hip is abducted. Or I need you to be able to see things like my right hip is abducted. Or my right hip is adducted. And the play, I'm going to come to your question in 1 second. This is so important because in people's gait, sometimes there's a lot of hips thrown around. That's ab and adduction of the hips. It's like if someone's walking and they throw that left hip out like bang! Right? I think that's the sound the hips makes too. If you do something like this right hip is abducted. Or if you drop it, sometimes people can drop it like boom, like that pelvis just drops. That's because of adduction. It's not magic. It's happening in joints. And I need to teach you how to see it. What, she had a question first, I'm gonna come back to it.
Do you have a pelvis over there that you could show me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the way that I think about it is like abducted aliens abducting you, but that looks,
Oh, you're thinking about like true crime, like someone's abducting you?
yeah, so, but that's what makes
I'm
me think
joking.
abduction.
That's actually not a bad idea until the illusions maybe sit in.
Well, that's what I'm struggling with.
So think of it like this. It looks like it's moving, you got abducted. Not literally, like, you're playing a role-playing game, I don't know. You get abducted. In the illusion, you abduct like your friend. Or, right? So like, what I mean by that is, you abducted, you got, you abducted.
But if you're shifting the weight to the left side, how is that? Wouldn't it be left side abduction?
From here to there is left side abduction, right? Left hip. From here to here is also left side abduction. Because this is the same thing as this. And this was the same thing as this.
Okay, I see it right now.
Awesome. And that's what it's all about, using different props, using different analogies. Anybody see Coming to America? Back in the day, it's kind of one of my, it's like, just taste the soup. He's like, where's the spoon? He's like, just taste the soup. And he's like, oh, wait, he was like, why do I need to taste the soup? He's like, where's the spoon? Aha. You have those aha moments. Aha. And I love those aha moments because that means you're going to have it for the rest of your life. This to that is the exact same as being here. Except I just don't have my balance.
Except you were saying when you went like that, because that was right hip abduction.
This would be right hip ab, and this would be left hip ad. This would be left hip ab, and this would be right hip ad. And I'm accentuating it with my trunk, but guys, it's going to be confusing because you could do it without moving your trunk, and it's subtle, and it's small, but you got a lot of stuff happening when you go here. My right hip's abducted, my left hip adducted, and I shift my weight here. Now my left hip abducted and my right hip adducted. We're going to get there.
So like when you're looking at the pelvis, the side that's like lower to the ground is abducting. Is that a good analogy or no?
It's not, well, it's a good analogy if that's what happened, but it doesn't always have to happen. So let me give
So
you.
are there any like exceptions to that?
There's no exceptions to the physics, but there's exceptions to what things look like, illusions.
Correct.
So what I'm trying to say is if this is Mr. Penguin in the
Right.
pelvis, him spinning or her spinning in either way could happen two different ways. Left side come up higher, or right side drop down lower. You see how you have the same spin?
But are those both the same? Like would those both mean that the right is abducted? Like
I don't have to.
No?
So let me give you some examples. I can make the pelvis pour water out my right side because of right hip abduction,
Right.
okay?
And your
But
right is lower in that moment. So
than the left. But I can also have the same spin of Mr. Penguin's pelvis by just adducting the left hip.
So the right hip didn't do anything there?
Well, it doesn't have to. Like I could have kept it, because it's off the ground, I could have kept it in anatomical position.
When you drop your hip like that, is the right hip abducted or not?
It doesn't have to be. So what I'm saying is that if I kept, this is a, boink, splinted, couldn't move my hip if I tried. If I do this, my right hip is still in anatomical position because both my femur and my socket did this at the same time.
And that's left hip
Mhm.
abduction.
Yeah,
But the right hip did nothing.
correct.
Is that because of?
It's because it didn't do
Location?
anything. No, it's just because it didn't do anything.
Oh,
If it stays in,
it didn't
it
do
honestly, it's no different
But
than,
if it was closed chain,
It's not-
it did the same thing.
then you'd have to move something, 100%. If I had both feet on the ground, now they would both have to do something. I was just giving you, you asked for exceptions,
Right,
and I'm trying to deliver on the exceptions.
okay,
But, all good?
that makes sense
So what do we have so far? Left hip ab, left hip add, right hip ab, right hip add. The only way to have bilateral ab and add is to be off of the ground or to be on a slippery surface. That makes sense? So there's a reason you jump up when you do jumping jacks for bilateral abduction, because if you got friction stopping you, you can't do those motions at the same time. Okay? Illusions. Looks like it's moving, but it's not. Looks like it's not moving, but it is. This concept is the exact same thing as this concept. It's just in the front plane. Okay? So this would be right hip ab, this would be right hip add, Okay? Any questions before we get to rotations? All right. Review of the knee. This is the lateral part of my leg. Lateral and medial evolved because we needed a concept for a side of a side. We can't say right of a right, left of a left, because those two things don't match up. So think about it. The concept of medial and lateral evolved from mirror concepts. That if I'm pointing to my thumb in the mirror, I'm also pointing to my thumb. But if I did the right side of my right, the right side of my left is my pinky. So the concept of lateral and medial is a mirror concept. Okay? What did I teach you about the knee? Hey, right knee, spin laterally or externally. Hey, child, spin to your right, spin to your left. So with the hip, it's the same thing. But this is where it's going to get you if we don't practice. Hey, right hip, spin laterally. Hey, right hip, spin externally. Right hip, external rotation. Right hip, lateral rotation. Right hip, internal rotation. Right hip, medial rotation. Looks like it's moving, and it is. Why do you think people say lefty-loosey, righty-tighty? And the reason, let me answer, Campbell. Sorry, we're in a hurry. The reason is because in classical mechanics, doors and knobs and faucets, the little piece will always move about the big piece. When you're undoing a faucet, the little piece is the cap on your bottle. But you know what you could do? You could take the cap of your water bottle and actually open it by spinning the bottle to the right. Could. But it's to show you these concepts of lefty-loosey, righty-tighty, these all-the-time concepts are for things that the door moves about the wall all the time. That's not how human body works. Sometimes we can loosen it up by spinning something to the right. I'm not saying it's the cap. So, check this. No cap. Did I say that right? I'm learning. My sons say stuff all the time. Google will help. All right. Right hip, external rotation. Right hip, spin laterally. This is the smaller piece. I know it's upside down, but this is the cap. Because this is smaller than the socket. From here to there. From here to there is the same movement as here to there. And the harder one that we need to see is from here to there is the same as from here to there. Now, let me once again try to explain why your brain wants to say external when it would be like internal. Because you were taught right side spin laterally is external, so your instinct wants to give credit to anything that spins that way. From a global reference, you want to give anything that spins like the kid rotating that way as external. But let me show you how that's not true. Feet on the ground, instead of opening because of the cap, we open because of the bottle. From here to there is internal rotation of the hip, of my right hip. From here to there is right hip internal rotation. Here to there is the same as here to there. But your instinct wants to say here to there, roll like this. So when my socket rolls like this, I want to call it external. Does that make sense? Bilateral hip external rotation. Bilateral hip internal rotation. Or I could do it like this, do it like this. But once again, you can't, if your feet are on the ground with friction being a limiting factor, I can't bilaterally externally or internal rotate. So my only chance is to do ipsilateral motions. One externals, one internals. And I need to teach you how to see which one is which and which one is happening. Okay? So, review. Left hip external rotation. Left hip internal rotation. Left hip external rotation. Left hip internal rotation. Right hip external rotation. Right hip internal rotation. Right hip external rotation. Right hip internal rotation. Yes, sir.
That rotation really is from, that's if you keep your foot stable, correct?
Well, I can have external rotation without keeping my foot stable. But what I'm trying to show you is that when I do this, aren't my toes pointing like laterally? Like my toes are kind of lined up with the bilateral axis, right? So I check this. My toes are now lined up with the bilateral axis. It gets me to the same place. It's that concept of here's a board, here's a piece of the board, and I roll the dice and I go forward 5 spaces. But I could also go forward 5 spaces by moving the board backwards if I keep the little piece in. So external rotation gets me to the same place as this external rotation. It just looks different because in one I'm moving the ball and the other I'm moving the socket. But joint motion is just one moving about the other. All right, here's the hardest ones, is when we're doing both at the same time. Start, finish, right hip internal, left hip external. Left hip internal, right hip external. And guys, it gets even harder when I don't make it obvious with my trunk. You could be here and just do this. I mean, heck, ball players do it all the time. When you're doing this, like that's because of your hips. But when you're using that plant leg as an axis of rotation for your whole body, like a figure skater spinning real fast about one toe, so that's what's happening. My left hip is not externally rotating, even though it looks like it. My left hip would be internally rotating until I run out of range of motion and then they take my foot off the ground. By that time, I've hopefully hit the ball.
Can you show that how this is done?
Say that one more time.
Would you mind showing that in the skeleton as well?
Yeah, absolutely. If it allows the motion. If not, I'll go grab the. right hip external. Cool? Now, assume he's on the ground. Right hip external. Because where I'm at, how would I have to go home? I'd have to internally rotate to go home. That shows me that I had to externally rotate when I left home. Okay? From here to there. From here to here, internal. From here to there, internal. See it? Is that better? Where are we at, guys? Bourgeois Hall. That's what my son would say. All right. While we're here, let's do some practice. What's this? Right ankle plantar. You need to know not only what it is, plantar flexed, know the bones that make it up. And it's not to put more work on you, it's just that, man, if you're gonna see what's happening, we gotta have X-ray vision here, guys. We gotta be able to see what's moving so that we don't fall for things that look like they are but they're not, or things that look like they're not but they are. You have to be able to see that talus roll. Remember, that's the wheels. Okay? What would this be? I start here and I do this. Give it some thought. Don't answer it out loud. Have a conversation with your neighbor if you wish. But here's my start position, and here's my finish position. Give that some thought if you were going to analyze. Point, point. Start, finish, like windshield wipers. Right? Left subtalar joint inversion and right subtalar joint eversion. Any questions? Don't say ankle. That's like saying the skateboard balances you with the wheels. Now, the wheels are designed to go forward and back. The wobble is in a totally separate place. All right, how about this one? Start, finish. I'm asking about the knees, okay? A knee conversation. Start, finish. Start, finish. Why do you think I have my thumbs out here on my knees? Because I'm trying to show you what? Axis. Good. Start, finish. Yes or no? Did the knees both do the same motion? Good. That's good. That's a good step. We analyze motion joint by joint. So, since I'm left-handed, let's start with my left knee. My left knee, hey, where are you at? Oh, you're externally rotated relative to anatomical. Where did you go? Hey, what about me? Dude, I'm going to get to you. Relax. Like my mom used to say, it's not about you right now, it's about your brother. I'll get to you. I start out being externally rotated, and I end by being internally rotated. And the only way that can happen is if I have left knee internal rotation. All right, right knee. Now let's talk about you. Where are you at, buddy? Oh, I see you're internally rotated. and then you end by being externally rotated, so you had to have external rotation to get there. Okay. All right. What's that?
The eversion as well, or can you only?
We can't, that can't, and you can't have that because the knee doesn't evert. So if we're having, I'm gonna tell you what I am saying and what I'm not saying. I'm not saying I didn't have some eversion. I'm saying that if we're having a knee conversation, all of that other stuff happening, other words, it's gonna mess with our head. It's like hey, subtalar joint, I'll talk about your vision, but right now it's all about the knee. Does that make sense? Because when you try to do it all at once, that gets hard. Because you have all these distracting things. So the answer I want to tell you is no, absolutely not, because we're not talking about it. We're just talking about the knee.
So only the subtalar joint can use inversion and eversion?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. All right, last one. Did that make sense? Like, I'm not saying it didn't move, it's just we weren't talking about it.
Yeah, I just didn't understand that eversion and inversion didn't happen in the knee as well.
Not a problem, not a problem. Okay, guys, last one. Start, finish. Start, finish. Here's what I want you to do. Tell me what happened at the knee, still a knee conversation. From A to B, and then from B to C. Knee conversation. A to B, and then B to C. So again, someone may say, well, didn't the ankle do something? I didn't say it didn't. We're just having a knee conversation, and then we can have an ankle conversation after. So I'm not disrespecting the ankle. We're just respecting the joint that we're talking about because we analyze motion joint by joint. I'm giving you a little time because this is where learning happens. Yes, sir.
Can you do the motion again?
Absolutely. A to B, and then B to C. The best learning is when you and your neighbor have different answers. And then you're like, all right, let's figure this out. And then you're like, oh, okay, I see now. I agree with you. That's how learning happens. It's practice. A to B, left knee flexion. B to C, left knee external rotation. But what about the hip? Not talking about the hip. What about the ankle? Not talking about the ankle. As my ancient professor used to tell me, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. And I'm like, bro, we talking salad here? What in the world are you talking about? And it was, give unto what is owed to that specific conversation, and don't go above and beyond. We had a question?
So when your knee externally rotates like that, is your hip internal or external?
So the question was, are they linked? If you externally rotate your knee, does your hip have to rotate? It doesn't. Because hip rotation, because it's about the long bone, would actually be like this. So if I did, now I'm not saying it can't, because you can rotate the hip because of the pelvis stuff, and we're going to talk about like horizontal, this version of ab and ad that can happen in the penguin pelvis's transverse plane, but just know it doesn't have to. Mm-mm. In fact, I could not move my hip at all. Like I can be here and do this, and my hips stay in the exact same place. I mean, I could do a lot of stuff, but I don't have to. All right, guys, be well.